It was supposed to be a normal day, the kind of day that starts with quiet anticipation and ends with relief. My disabled daughter, Emily, and I were heading to the airport for a routine flight. Emily, only 8 years old, was heart-patient and relied on a wheelchair for mobility. Her world had always been delicate, carefully shielded from chaos, from anyone who might harm her. I had spent years building routines to protect her from the unexpected, from danger, from the cruel twists life sometimes threw at us. I never imagined that danger would appear in the form of someone I had encountered countless times before. HOA Karen. Karen was notorious in our neighborhood, a woman with entitlement radiating from her pores, a persistent need to control, and a disregard for anyone who stood in her way. She had a long history of targeting me and my family, and every encounter left a mark, not just on us, but on our nerves. And now, inexplicably, she had tracked us to the airport. The morning had begun. Innocently enough, Emily was in her wheelchair, bundled in a cozy sweater, her favorite blanket draped across her lap. Her tiny hands clutched a stuffed rabbit, the only companion she refused to leave behind. I wheeled her through the entrance of the airport, glancing at the electronic displays overhead, the names of cities scrolling in bright letters. Security cameras lined the walls, an omnipresent reminder of the world's unpredictability. And yet, nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. As we approached the check-in counter, a sense of unease settled over me. Airports always carried an undercurrent of tension, but this was different. My instincts, honed over years of shielding Emily, screamed at me. I scanned the crowd and froze. There she was, HOA Karen. She was standing near a cluster of travelers, her gaze locked on us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Karen's presence was like a storm waiting to break, a force of chaos intent on destruction. I instinctively moved Emily behind me, positioning her wheelchair so that my body blocked the view. My heart pounded violently against my chest, a frantic drum warning me that something terrible was about to happen. Karen's eyes met mine, and in that moment, everything froze. The world around us, the hustle of travelers, the squeak of luggage wheels on polished floors, the distant announcements of flights boarding faded into a blur. All I could see was the searing hatred in her eyes, the twisted satisfaction of a predator who had finally found her prey. Then, without warning, she lunged. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the terminal, though no one could have imagined what was coming next. Karen pulled a small handgun from the depths of her bag, a weapon no one expected to see in an airport, where security was. We're supposed to prevent precisely this. Panic erupted immediately. People screamed, luggage toppled over, and the air was filled with the metallic scent of fear. I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over. I lunged forward, pushing Emily out of her chair, dragging her toward the nearest cover. My hands shook uncontrollably, adrenaline flooding my veins. Karen fired once, then twice. The shots rang through the terminal like thunderclaps, sharp, horrifying, and deadly. The crowd scattered in all directions, leaving chaos in their wake. Emily screamed, a sound so pure and terrified it tore at my heart. My worst nightmare had become reality. She had been grazed by one of the bullets, her tiny body convulsed in pain, the blood bright against her pale skin. My vision tunneled as I held her, trying desperately to stop the bleeding, to shield her from further harm. I shouted for help, my voice cracking with desperation. "Somebody call security? Please! She's been shot!" In those seconds, which felt like hours, the world became a blur of motion and sound. Security personnel appeared seemingly out of nowhere, their uniforms crisp, weapons drawn, moving with precision and urgency. Karen froze, caught between her anger and the sudden realization that her actions had consequences. She fired once more, but the shots went wild as security closed in, a coordinated wall of protection surrounding us and cutting off her escape. I clutched Emily tightly, feeling the warmth of her blood on my hands, the fragile life that depended entirely on me. The metallic taste of fear lingered in my mouth as I whispered reassurances I barely believed myself. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. You're okay." Her small hands trembled, gripping mine, and I could feel every heartbeat, every tiny pulse, as if our lives were tethered together by a single fragile thread around us. The terminal descended into chaos. Travelers cried, some screaming, some frozen in shock. And announcements blared over the PA system, warning of a lockdown, of emergency protocols activated. Security moved swiftly, corralling Karen, her arms flailing, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. She had underestimated the speed, the training, the readiness of airport security. In mere seconds, they had neutralized the threat. I looked down at Emily, tears streaming down my face, and felt a surge of anger so intense it burned through every fiber of my being. Karen had targeted her because she was vulnerable, because she was different, because she thought she could inflict pain without consequence. But now, as Emily whimpered in my arms, I knew she would pay for this. Justice, swift and unrelenting, was coming. The medics arrived, moving with efficiency and calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos around us. Emily was lifted gently onto a stretcher, her small body fragile and trembling, but alive. I followed, refusing to let go, my mind racing with questions, with fear, with the need to understand how someone could harbor such malice. Even as we were whisked away to the emergency care area, my eyes never left Karen. She was being restrained, her hands cuffed behind her back, screaming and cursing, the venom in her words a testament to the darkness she carried. But I didn't feel relief, not yet. The danger had been stopped, yes, but the damage had been done. Emily had been hurt, her trust shattered, her world briefly plunged into terror, and in that moment, I made a vow. Karen might have attacked us, might have fired her weapon, might have thought she could terrorize my daughter with impunity, but she would never win. Not now, not ever. The fight had just begun, and the airport incident was only the opening act of a story that would expose her cruelty, her recklessness, and her obsession with control. As I held Emily in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the quiet hum of machinery, I felt the weight of what had happened. The terminal was no longer just a place of travel, it had become a battlefield, a stage where malice and courage collided, leaving scars that would take time to heal. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this was only the beginning of a confrontation that would demand everything I had, and more, to protect the daughter I loved more than life itself. The minutes that followed the shots were a blur of sirens, shouting, and panicked passengers. Every second stretched into an eternity as I stayed glued to Emily's side, cradling her trembling body. Her little heart, already fragile, thumped in uneven beats beneath my hands, and I felt every flutter as if it were my own life, hanging in the balance. The medics worked with precision, their movements calm and practiced, but in my mind, everything was chaos. The airport, the threat, the unthinkable attack from HOA Karen. The security had barricaded the terminal entrances, turning the bustling airport into a fortress. Announcements over the PA system instructed everyone to stay calm, to remain where they were, and for law enforcement officers to take control of the situation. But for anyone who had witnessed the attack, calm was impossible. I could still hear Karen's shrill voice echoing across the terminal as she was restrained, screaming threats, insults, and bizarre declarations of entitlement. Every word was a dagger aimed at our peace of mind, yet security didn't flinch. They had her contained, and that was all that mattered in that moment. I could feel the adrenaline still surging through my veins. My hands were trembling, covered in Emily's blood, and the metallic scent clung to my skin, but I forced myself to breathe, to focus, because Emily needed me to be steady. I whispered reassurances over and over, even though my own voice was shaky. "It's okay, baby, you're safe. You're going to be okay." Her eyes, wide and terrified, searched mine for the truth, for hope, for the certainty that everything would be all right, and I gave it to her, even if inside I was shaken to my core. Law enforcement officers, both uniformed and plainclothes, had now flooded the terminal. They secured every exit, questioned witnesses, and began piecing together the timeline of events. Multiple flights were delayed or canceled, travelers huddled in corners, and airport personnel tried desperately to restore a sense of order, but the atmosphere was electric with fear. Everyone knew how close we had come to a catastrophe. Meanwhile, Karen continued to scream and struggle against the cuffs, her behavior increasingly erratic. Officers had to employ restraining techniques to ensure she couldn't reach her weapon or anyone else. Her eyes, wild and unhinged, darted around the terminal, as if searching for another victim. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a moment of impulse. Karen had been planning, anticipating, and tracking us. The audacity, the malice, the sheer cruelty, it was beyond comprehension. Emily was being stabilized by the medics, who worked quickly to clean and bandage the wound. The bullet had grazed her side, thankfully missing vital organs, but the shock to her system was immense. Her small body trembled, and her face was pale, with tears streaking down her cheeks. I held her hand, refusing to let go, whispering words of comfort while secretly shaking with fear and anger. The sight of my daughter, the child I had fought so hard to protect, injured because of someone else's obsession, ignited a fire inside me. As Emily was lifted onto a stretcher to be taken to the hospital, I followed, holding onto her blankets, her stuffed rabbit, anything that gave her comfort. The medics spoke in calm, clipped tones, explaining the severity of the injury and the steps they were taking, but their words barely penetrated the fog of fear and rage enveloping me. I felt a need for action, for justice, for accountability that could not be postponed. Cotton could not walk away from this. Not this time. Outside the terminal, more officers had arrived. SWAT teams, airport police, and federal agents coordinated with precision, establishing a perimeter around the scene. News crews began gathering, their cameras flashing bright lights into the chaos, capturing footage of Karen being led away in cuffs, her face twisted in fury and defiance. She had been stopped, yes, but the world now bore witness to her cruelty. and I could feel the momentum of justice shifting in my favor. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, Emily was stabilized enough to be moved to a private emergency care area. The staff worked tirelessly, inserting IVs, monitoring her heart rate, and administering pain relief. I sat beside her, holding her hand, stroking her hair, whispering over and over, "You're safe, Emily. I've got you. Nothing's going to hurt you now." Her tiny fingers squeezed mine weakly, her eyes reflecting both pain and trust. It was a fragile connection, but it was all I had, and I clung to it with every ounce of my strength. Through the chaos, I could hear the murmurs of fellow passengers recounting what had happened. Shocked voices relayed fragments of the event. She just pulled a gun, right in front of the little girl. Can you believe it? Security moved so fast, I didn't even see them approach her. Every account, every whisper reinforced the gravity of Karen's actions. The danger she had posed not just to my family, but to everyone in the terminal. And then the official announcement came. The terminal was under lockdown, flights would be delayed, and no one would leave until law enforcement completed their investigation. It was a relief to know that Karen could not escape, that she was finally facing consequences, but the relief was tempered by the reality of Emily's injuries. My daughter, my baby, had been hurt, and for the first time I felt the full weight of vulnerability, how quickly, how violently someone could invade your life and shatter your sense of safety. Even as Emily rested, sedated and weak, I made a mental note of every detail: the way Karen had moved, the speed at which security intervened, the terror in Emily's eyes, and the overwhelming chaos in the terminal. Every piece mattered, every observation would be crucial in ensuring that Karen faced the full extent of the law. She had crossed a line that could never be forgiven, a line that demanded justice. As I sat there, holding Emily, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen's actions had set off a chain of events that would reverberate far beyond the airport. Walls, legal action, media exposure, and public outrage would follow, but none of that mattered in that moment. All that mattered was the fragile life in my arms and the fierce promise I had made. No one would ever harm her again without paying a steep price. The chaos had subsided slightly, but the tension lingered, a thick fog that refused to dissipate. Emily's injury was minor in terms of survival, but the psychological impact would last far longer. I promised myself I would shield her from further trauma, even as the world outside prepared to watch Karen face the consequences of her violent, unthinkable actions. And in that hospital waiting room, surrounded by officers and medics, I understood one truth clearly: the fight for Emily's safety was far from over, and Karen's reign of terror had finally met its first unyielding resistance. The hours after the airport incident felt surreal, like living inside a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Emily was stabilized in the pediatric trauma unit, her small body resting under soft blankets, monitors beeping in rhythm with her fragile heartbeat. The medics had assured me that physically she would recover, that the bullet had grazed her and missed anything critical. But the emotional toll, the fear etched into her young face, was something that no medicine could instantly erase. I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand, refusing to leave. Each nurse who came in to check her vitals offered sympathetic words, but they didn't understand the storm raging inside me. HOA Karen had crossed a line that could never be undone, and now the responsibility fell on me to ensure that she would pay. My phone buzzed incessantly, a mix of texts from family, concerned friends, and an endless stream of breaking news alerts. Apparently the shooting at the airport had made national headlines within minutes. The news referred to Karen as the rogue HOA member who opened fire in a public terminal, and the videos captured by bystanders circulated widely on social media. Watching the videos was almost unbearable. The footage showed Karen lunging, gun raised, firing indiscriminately. The terror on the faces of travelers around us, and Emily, the tiniest figure, at the center of chaos. It made my stomach churn, my hands shake. People were calling us heroes for surviving, but I couldn't feel heroic, and painfully aware that Emily's vulnerability had made her an easy target. Law enforcement arrived at the hospital shortly afterward. Detectives, airport police, and federal agents all wanted statements time. They asked me to recount every detail, to describe Karen's movements, the number of shots fired, and any interaction she had with us beforehand. I repeated the story over and over, my voice trembling, but my resolve unbroken. Every officer took meticulous notes, their expressions serious, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the crime. Karen had been charged immediately with multiple counts: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, endangering a child, and violation of federal airport security laws. The sheer number of charges reflected the magnitude of her recklessness. I was assured that she would be held without bail, but the anger simmering inside me demanded more than legal reassurance. Karen's malice was deliberate, personal, and calculated. She hadn't just attacked my daughter. She had threatened every traveler in the terminal. As the investigation unfolded, reporters and media outlets swarmed. Cameras, microphones, and flashing lights invaded the quiet space of the hospital waiting room. I tried to shield Emily from the chaos, pulling the blanket over her and keeping her eyes away from the cameras. Questions came at me relentlessly. How is she doing? I answered cautiously, trying to balance my outrage with the need to protect Emily from the overwhelming. Public outrage skyrocketed, fueled by videos and eyewitness accounts. Social media was flooded with hashtags demanding Karen's prosecution and warning others about the dangers posed by violent, entitled individuals hiding behind seemingly innocuous roles like HOA members. People across the country expressed shock, horror, and support for Emily, sending messages of love and solidarity. The attention was overwhelming, yet it strengthened my determination to ensure that Karen faced the full weight of the law. Meanwhile, I focused on Emily's recovery. She was alert but frightened, her little body tense with trauma. Even the sound of a cart rolling down the hospital corridor or a sudden shout caused her to flinch. I stayed by her side, holding her hand, stroking her hair, whispering the same words I had repeated over and over. You're safe now. I've got you. No one can hurt you again. Slowly, she began to trust the world again, though every sound, every shadow, reminded her of the attack. The detectives interviewed witnesses, employees, and travelers who had been in the terminal. Each account painted a picture of chaos and heroism, the bravery of security personnel, the terror in Emily's eyes, and the sheer recklessness of Karen's attack. One officer told me that the response had been faster than expected, that the coordination between airport security and law enforcement had likely prevented a far worse tragedy, but I didn't feel relief. The relief was overshadowed by anger at Karen for attempting to harm my child, for daring to violate every safety protocol, for thinking her entitlement excused her actions. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The legal process began immediately. Karen was arraigned under heavy guard, and every detail of the shooting was presented to the court. Her bail was denied, and she was placed in a high-security facility pending trial. I followed the case closely, knowing that every piece of evidence mattered. The airport surveillance footage, eyewitness testimony, and Emily's statement, as fragile as it was, would all be crucial in ensuring justice. The lawyers emphasized the seriousness of the charges. They were determined that Karen would never threaten another child or anyone again. Even as the legal proceedings moved forward, I had to focus on Emily. She needed reassurance, therapy, and stability. A child psychologist began working with her to use gentle methods to help her process the trauma. Slowly, Emily began to regain confidence in her. She could sit in the hospital playroom without flinching, interact with toys, and even laugh quietly at a cartoon on the small television in her room. But I knew the journey to full emotional recovery would be long. Trust, once shattered, is never easily rebuilt, especially for a child who had been deliberately targeted. I also had to consider the broader implications. Karen had not just attacked Emily, she had endangered hundreds of people at the airport. The media coverage and public attention meant that this case would serve as a warning. Entitlement, obsession, and violence would not go unchecked. I realized that while Emily's recovery was my immediate priority, exposing Karen's dangerous behavior publicly was equally vital. This was not just personal justice. It was a statement that society would not tolerate such reckless aggression. Days turned into weeks. Emily healed physically, her bandages removed, bruises fading, but the memory of the attack lingered. I watched her every move, aware of how quickly a routine activity could trigger anxiety or fear. Yet I also saw resilience in her as a strength I hadn't fully realized before. She had survived something horrific, and she was learning, slowly, to trust that the world could be safe again. And through it all, Karen remained in custody, her name splashed across news headlines, her reputation in ruins, and her future uncertain. The legal wheels turned slowly but steadily, and I vowed to be present for every step, ensuring that Emily's attacker faced full accountability. I understood now that the fight wasn't just for justice, it was for closure, for safety, and for the peace of mind every parent deserves when protecting their child. By the end of Section 3, the story shifts from immediate terror to the long, tense aftermath media scrutiny, investigation, and the beginning of legal reckoning while keeping Emily's recovery and emotional journey central. The day of the trial arrived like a storm on the horizon, tense and unavoidable. Emily and I walked into the courthouse early in the morning, the sterile smell of polished floors and legal proceedings filling the air. Every step echoed my anticipation. Every heartbeat thumped with a mixture of fear and resolve. Today, Karen would face the consequences of her actions not as a rumor, not as a headline, but in the cold, undeniable light of justice. Emily held my hand tightly, her small fingers clinging to mine with trust I knew she had earned through months of healing. She had grown stronger in the weeks since the airport shooting, but the fear lingered beneath the surface. I whispered softly as we took our seats in the courtroom. "You're safe, Emily. No one can hurt you here. Today, they'll see what she did." Her eyes, wide and anxious, met mine, and I saw courage shining faintly through the lingering shadows of trauma. Karen was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, her expression a twisted mask of rage, disbelief, and self-right. She scanned the room, her gaze briefly locking on us. I could feel the venom in her eyes, the same malice that had driven her to attack my daughter at the airport. But this time, she would not escape. Today, the world would see her for what she truly was. A violent, entitled individual whose obsession had crossed every moral and legal boundary imaginable. The prosecution began their case immediately, presenting evidence that was as damning as it was irrefutable. Security camera footage showed Karen drawing her weapon and firing indiscriminately at travelers. Witnesses testified to her erratic behavior, describing the chaos, the screams, and Emily's terrified reactions. Each piece of evidence built an unbreakable chain connecting Karen to the crime she had committed. The judge and jury absorbed every detail with seriousness, their faces reflecting the gravity of what had occurred. When it was my turn to testify, I felt my throat tighten. Every memory of that day surged back, the metallic smell, the deafening shots, Emily screaming, the panic around us. I described Karen's actions in detail, the way she lunged with a gun, her intent to harm, and the terror she inflicted not just on Emily but on hundreds of innocent people. I recounted the moments I held Emily, bleeding and trembling, and the sense of helplessness that had consumed me. My voice shook, but I spoke every word with the clarity of someone who had witnessed true danger. Emily, sitting beside me, clutched her stuffed rabbit, her small frame trembling but present. The prosecution carefully guided her testimony, allowing her to express, in her own words, what she had experienced. She described the fear, the confusion, and the moment she realized she was hurt. Her bravery in the courtroom stunned everyone present. She had faced the unthinkable and had the courage to speak her truth. Even the jury seemed moved, their expressions softening as they absorbed the weight of her words. Karen's defense tried to argue impulsivity, claiming she had not intended to cause serious harm, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her stalking behavior, the planning required to bring a gun into a secured airport, and the sheer recklessness of her actions. Every attempt to minimize her responsibility was met with the stark reality of the videos, the eyewitness testimonies, and Emily's testimony. The courtroom was silent at times, the gravity of her intent hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. As the trial progressed, I watched Karen crumble under the weight of undeniable facts. Her fury became desperation, her bluster replaced by the realization that her actions had consequences far beyond her control. The judge, a stern figure of authority, meticulously reviewed the evidence, ensuring every legal protocol was followed, every victim's voice heard. The tension in the room was palpable. Every person present knew this was the moment where justice would finally be rendered. When the verdict was announced, the words echoed through the courtroom with the force of finality, guilty, on all counts. Karen's face drained of color as the sentence was read aloud: years in prison for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, endangering a child, and federal violations. The gavel struck the bench, a sound that reverberated not just through the room, but through the months of fear, trauma, and anger that had gripped my family. Justice, slow and deliberate, had finally arrived. I exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering adrenaline flooding my body. Emily, still small and fragile, looked up at me, her eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and understanding. I leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. See, baby? They saw what she did. She can't hurt anyone else. Now, you're safe. Her tiny hand squeezed mine, a gesture of trust and resilience that carried more weight than any words could convey. Even after the courtroom drama ended, life slowly began to settle. Emily continued therapy to heal from the psychological scars, while I focused on rebuilding our sense of normalcy. The airport shooting had been a traumatic rupture, but it had also revealed our inner strength. Emily, my little warrior, had survived, and in doing so, had shown courage that inspired everyone around her. News outlets continued to cover the case, highlighting the heroic response of airport security, the bravery of Emily, and the undeniable recklessness of Karen's actions. Public reaction was overwhelmingly supportive, with messages of encouragement flooding in from across the country. It was a reminder that while violence and malice existed in the world, so did justice, resilience, and collective outrage against cruelty. In the quiet moments, I reflected on everything we had endured. From the tear in the airport terminal to the tense courtroom showdown, the experience had changed us. Emily's vulnerability had made her a target, but it had also revealed her incredible resilience. Karen, despite her malice and entitlement, had been held accountable, and the legal system had worked, as it should, swiftly, decisively, and fairly. And those scars would remain visible, and invisibly knew one thing with certainty: no one, not even someone as twisted as HOA Karen, could ever take away the courage, love, and trust that had grown between Emily and me. We had faced the unimaginable together, and we had emerged stronger. The world had witnessed Karen's recklessness, but more importantly, It had witnessed a mother and daughter standing unbroken in the face of terror. As we walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, Emily's wheelchair moving steadily beneath her, I felt the weight lift slightly from my shoulders. The nightmare had ended, the danger neutralized, and justice served. And though the memory of that day would never fade, neither would the strength it revered, a strength that would protect us, guide us, and remind us that even in the darkest moments, courage and love could prevail.